Thank you, Lucy, for that introduction. Thank you to Father Stephen and to all the organizers of this conference. I'm glad to be here with you in Hong Kong. So there's a handout for this talk, and it's on the QR code you just saw. And also this PowerPoint, if you wish, there's a QR code that will be at the back. So both of those, feel free to get. You don't have to write copious notes. So today we've been talking about tensions, and in light of that, to talk about, amidst the tensions, how do we recognize Christ's voice in our lives? In life, God gives us options to choose between different places to work, different places to serve, different people to marry, or maybe not get married. And God gives us real freedom to choose between A, B, and C. And each of these choices will influence our future. Have you ever wondered if last year a choice you made, if you had chosen something else, how you would be today? I'm just going to show you a little clip from a movie that explores this, of one woman, of two possibilities in her life, and how that affects her future. From this moment of two possibilities, this is the beginning of the movie, perhaps you've seen it, Sliding Doors. The rest of the movie goes on to explore, if she gets onto the train and meets this man who's beside her, what her life is like. And the same movie also explores, if she didn't get on the train, what her life is like. Have you ever had an experience like that? Perhaps a turning point in your life? Is it possible for us as human beings not just to make decisions between A, B, and C, but to make decisions together with Jesus? To ask of A, B, and C, Jesus, which one would you like me to choose? This is what Ignatian spirituality, and particularly discernment, is about. Ignatius in his own life found that there were many voices. The voice of his family telling him not to leave home. The voice of society, of Spain at that time, telling him what he should do and what he shouldn't do. His own inner voice. Of all of these voices, how do we know what is from God and what is not? This is what Ignatian discernment is about. So in Chinese, Fan Bin, great. And in English, I know discernment. Can I give you a little test? Where does this come from? What about Latin? Do you know this word? Discernere. This is where we get discern in English. This is from Latin. It's a verb. And it's an action you can do with your hands. And especially farmers do this. Can you guess what this means literally? In Chinese, it's one character. Sai. This is what discernment literally means, to sift. So, to sift like farmers, but to sift what? To sift the voices in our lives. Because we live among many voices and we live in this tension. People have different expectations of us. This society, Hong Kong, has different expectations on us. Family, friends, our bosses. So if we want to sift the voices, what can we use to sift? Because we don't have a basket, we don't have a sifter. Ignatius has given us two guides, two sifters, to help us to discern, to sift voices. Consolation and desolation. And I'm sure that many of you have heard of this. If I were to ask you, what is an example of consolation, what would you think of? Peace, yes, a great example. Peace, joy, courage, a sense that I am cooperating with God, an increase in faith, hope, love. Desolation is often the opposite, so a sense of fear, anxiety, a self-centeredness, a lack of hope, faith, love. But really, these are just examples. Do you know what the essence of consolation is? It is actually a direction. What in life draws me closer to God? So when I look at this relationship in my life, or this job, or this service, in general, is it drawing me closer to God, consolation, or away from God, desolation? If you want to understand Ignatian discernment, at least from the Ignatian point of view, this is the foundation. Not if something makes me feel good or bad, or is easy or difficult. These are interesting questions. But the key question in Ignatian discernment is what draws me closer to God and what draws me away from God. So it is about direction. So many people are okay with this theory, but what about in daily life? When do you feel consolation and desolation in daily life? What does that look like? Why don't we look at some examples? How would you say this in Cantonese? In English, it's selfie. Oh, you also use selfie, okay. They're both silent. So we need to pay attention to our own needs, our physical needs, our psychological needs. But is it necessary for me to take a picture of lunch every day and put it on Facebook? Is it possible that it's a bit over, that I'm overly aware of myself? Or I think too much about what others are thinking of me, what I wear, what I eat. I need to pay attention to my needs, but is it possible that sometimes I go overboard? But this is a subtle example of desolation, of self-centeredness, rather than being focused on God. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and the conversation ends, and you feel like something has been taken away from you, like you've been robbed of peace or hope for the future? This subtle feeling is also an example of desolation. Of something taking us, drawing us away from God. So I don't mean just having a bad day, it happens once, especially if it happens consistently. Is there a relationship in your life, or perhaps something at work, or something, another part of your life, where the consistent root is fear, is anxiety? Maybe your boss, maybe often your boss makes you sick sigma, or you're living in a situation of injustice, of unfairness in some way, and it makes you angry. And it's hard to pray when you get home. It's hard to wake up and want to go to work. These are all examples of desolation. Maybe one more subtle example, busyness. Is there anything in life that makes you lose balance? So we have different types of needs. We need to work, but we also need to rest, to recharge, leisure. We also need time for prayer, to get in touch with the transcendent. Is there something in my life that makes me just focus on one of these and neglect the other two? This may not seem obviously evil, but this is also a kind of desolation. God wants us to recognize that we are human beings with needs as much as possible to keep balance in our lives. That's not easy. So just in review, some examples of desolation: self-centeredness, fear or anxiety, turmoil, despair, a lack of hope, lack of balance, an unwillingness to pray or to think of what God desires for my life. The main point, these are all examples, the main essence of desolation is what draws me away from God. It's a direction. But we know that life is much more than negative. God is with us here on earth. Have you ever felt consolation in your life? Maybe it happens every day for you. But what if I were to ask you, when was the last time you felt deep peace in your life? Where were you when you felt that peace? The world is so busy. When was the last time you felt deep peace? Who were you with? What were you doing? This is classic consolation. Ignatius encourages us to go back to that place. Let God nourish you again, and it may be different from the person beside you. We all know that God is with us all the time. When was the last time you felt God with you? That God was almost sitting beside you or filling your being. And what were you doing at that time? Maybe you were in nature. Maybe you were listening to music. Maybe you were just with someone you love. Maybe you were serving someone else. That, not just knowing, but feeling God with you is classic consolation. These very simple words in English, they are what we do during the day. Is there anything different between these three words? If we were a smaller group, maybe we could share a bit more. I would like to hear your opinions. But at least basically, a job is something we may do, perhaps even for a summer, but a career is more long-term. It has to do with our education. A vocation is even deeper. Vocation comes from the word for voice in Latin, vox. This necessarily comes from God. We cannot choose our vocation, whether it's the married life, the single life, or what work we do. So it comes from God. And because it comes from God, it necessarily relates to the skills and abilities that you have. Because your skills and abilities also come from God. So when these three are consistent, when they're together, a person often feels fulfillment in life, a sense of meaning. When these three are different, a person often feels frustrated in life. When it's time to wake up, they are doubtful about whether they should go to work or not. A lot of turmoil. And perhaps they need to find a place outside of work to express their gifts because they can't do it there. Why do I raise this? What does this have to do with consolation or hearing God's voice in this field of service? Often people will say, I want to hear Jesus' voice, but I don't hear anything. And it is difficult to hear. But perhaps Jesus is not going to use a Cantonese or English, but he may give us a sense of fulfillment. Notice what gives you meaning in life, what gives you fulfillment. And if you can, if you are able, order these according to this. This is also consolation. What brings you fulfillment? What brings you meaning? Or what do you have a passion in life? What makes your heart sing? What do you do? And when you do it, you forget about the time. And you're using the gifts and abilities that you have. Is there anything you do that when you do it, in a way, you're giving love to another or to a group? And at the same time, they may not know, but you are also receiving love. you are being fulfilled, you are being nourished. Is there anything that satisfies those conditions for you? Whatever that is for you, when you do that, you are cooperating with God's voice in your life. It may be very different from the person beside you, but that again is an example of classic consolation. So, peace in God, sensing God present, strength to do what is loving, because to love others sometimes is really inconvenient. Hope for the future. I don't know what's ahead, I can't see, but I feel this sense that it will bring blessing, hope, a sense of fulfillment, meaning. Being nourished by God. What allows me to use the gifts and talents that God has given me. So I feel like I'm actually working with God. I'm on the same page with God. What makes my heart sing. But again, these are all examples. The most important thing is what draws me closer to God in life. So this is a little bit of theory to begin about discernment. What is consolation and desolation? And we heard Father Stephen, Sally, Mohan talk about tensions in life. Are there particular tensions in discernment? See if any of these make sense. You tell me. Have you ever been caught in between what you want to do and what your family wants you to do? Perhaps what society wants you to do. That there are certain jobs that are acceptable, that are respectable. The salary is high. You need a particular degree to get it. But you know that if you do this job and you can do it, you won't be fulfilled. You will feel like something is missing in life. How do you live among the tension of these voices? The tension between wanting to know now and having to wait. We live in a time now that when we send a WhatsApp message to a friend, if that friend doesn't respond within a minute, we start to worry that something is wrong. It's hard to wait. It's hard to wait on a person, and it's hard to wait on God. If I ask God, God, would you like me to choose A or B? It's hard for us to wait for God's response. This is also a tension. Discernment often isn't between A, something very good, and B, something evil. If A and B were good and evil, actually we wouldn't need to discern. That's a question of the will. Can I choose what is good? Most often, A and B are both good, but I only have time for one. Or I can only marry one person. I can only serve one group at this time. How do I choose the better? This is the matches of what Ignatian spirituality is about. Another tension. What is going on in this picture here? I'm not sure if you can read that. Have you ever found yourself in this tension? You sense that God wants something for you, but you also sense that you don't want that. You think you would like something better, and actually you don't see any good reasons for trusting Jesus and what Jesus wants. You see the teddy bear in your hand. You don't see the teddy bear, the bigger bear, behind Jesus. It's very difficult for this girl to put down a bear for something invisible. It's attention. So these are just a few. Often in discernment, we are invited to choose between living in our comfort zone and sacrificing. If you think about your spouse or your children, often love involves sacrifice. And great love involves great sacrifice. But God will never force us. We live in this tension. We are really honestly free to choose. Choosing between what is safe and what is familiar, or taking a risk in God, stepping into something unknown that may bring fulfillment, but may bring failure. Do I dare to do this? This is a tension of choosing what is convenient rather than surrendering to a God that is invisible? Basically, it comes down to this question: do I trust this person? Because taking a risk is not sway again. It's taking a risk in God. This is what discernment is about. How do I move forward amidst these very real tensions that make life uncomfortable? Just you've probably seen an image, this image or an image like this. This child is probably not thinking, okay, I will jump, but if my father doesn't catch me, I'll jump in a way that I'll land safely. In English we say, hedge your bets. This child is probably not thinking that. They're just thinking, I know my father will catch me. I'm just going to go all out, to totally go in. Sometimes as adults, though, we know here that God will not fool us, but just in case, we hedge our bets and we live in a way that we don't have to trust God fully. Ignatian discernment is about saying, how can I put the focus on the God that loves me? How can I allow my trust in God to guide my decisions today? So I invite you to consider, we're coming to the end of the year, tomorrow's the last day of the year. Is there a real practical decision that you will have to make in 2019? What would the A, B, and C be for you? I'll just give you a few seconds of silence because we're about to look at practically how to make a discernment, but I think it may be more interesting for you if you consider a real decision that you would like to know. So what is a decision that you have to make next year? And honestly, you would like to know, Jesus, do you want me to pick A, B, or C? Let's pause for a moment. Hope that you have thought of something. It doesn't need to be major. If not, that's okay. Perhaps something will come up as we speak. So just to review, God has, in love, has given us freedom to choose between A, B, and C. And God honestly loves us. God will not force us. Ignatian spirituality steps back and says, of A, B, and C, Lord, which one would you like me to choose? I would like to know what your desire for my life is, because I trust you. I trust that you will not fool me. The choice you would like me to make will bring the greatest blessing for me and the people around me. But to be honest, following Jesus is not easy. We are talking about discernment, but I don't want you to think that I think it's easy. It's it can be very difficult. Sometimes we have to make a decision that will isolate us from others. That it takes great courage to not be like others. To follow Jesus is really not easy. But if I would like to hear Jesus' voice, how can I move forward between the tensions? And is there a practical way? So the spiritual exercises offer us a way through prayer to move forward with Jesus. So I'd just like to go through these steps. This is all in your handout in the PowerPoint, so please don't worry about writing notes. So the first step is actually not to look at the decision. It's to step back and not just know, but to taste God's unconditional love for you. To not just know, but to feel. No matter what decision option you choose in the end, it will not change Jesus' love for you. Jesus will not love you less because you choose C instead of A. So how would you get in touch with this love? It's up to you. But one way is to pray with Scripture. So for example, Isaiah 43, verse 1. Originally, this is God speaking to the people of Israel. But what would it be like to invite Jesus to sit beside you? and for Jesus to say personally to you, do not be afraid, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. To linger with that and to see what comes up in your heart. Maybe you feel afraid. Great. Tell Jesus. He's beside you. Tell him that you're afraid. How does he respond to you? If there's anything you're worried about, don't suppress it. Tell Jesus about it. See how he responds to you. This is the first step. So that you may feel that this is very obvious. But sometimes we enter into discernment not with love, but with fear. Like A, B, and C, Danzhong, from A, B, and C, there's one that's right and the other two are wrong. And I have to guess God's wish. And if I make a mistake, God's going to punish me or I'm going to suffer. This approach invites us to enter into this process with love, with Jesus. Just for the sake of practicality, what if we had a common example of something to discern as we go through these steps? So let's say you're working in Hong Kong and option A is to stay in Hong Kong. But your boss says you can also move to, let's say, Beijing, to mainland China. And let's say option C, let's pick another place where Chinese is predominant. So let's say let's say Vancouver. So you can either go to Beijing, Vancouver, or stay in Hong Kong. So if you've had time to pray with this, and the time is up to you how much you spend with each step. The next step is to write out the question and the options as you know them. You may say, this is very simple. I know it, I know the question. But you may be surprised. Sometimes when we write something out, suddenly something becomes clearer. And there are different ways to write out the question. So for example, you could say, should I stay in Hong Kong? Should I move to Beijing? Or should I move to Vancouver? But notice that should, that ingoy. Perhaps a better way to write out the question is, Lord, are you inviting me to stay in Hong Kong? Are you inviting me to move to Beijing or to move to Vancouver? It's a very subtle difference, but here the focus is on Jesus and what his desire is, rather than ingoy, what I should do, which can bring a lot of pressure. So it takes time, and maybe there are more than 3 possibilities. I'm speaking very quickly. In reality, these steps take time, so please don't feel pressure to go ahead, but because of time, I will just go on to the next step. The next step is to consider, do I have Ignatian indifference as I move in this process? Indifference, in general English parlance, perhaps means matolak, or I don't care, or whatever, so way. But Ignatian indifference is different. It has to do with freedom. Is my heart free enough to accept what Jesus wants of me? 不偏不倚的心. Perhaps it's easier to look at this from a lack of indifference. This morning, Father Stephen mentioned Mark 10, the story of a young man who comes before Jesus and asks about eternal life. And Jesus, what does Jesus say to him? Sell everything you own and come and follow me. And then how does the story end? He goes away sad because of his possessions. So this is a classic example of lacking Ignatian indifference. So he knows what Jesus wants, but he can't follow through because he has an inordinate attachment. He can't let go for him of the wealth. So perhaps for me it's not wealth, perhaps it's something else, but I can't let go. I'm not free enough to say yes to Jesus. So Ignatian indifference is about having enough freedom to say yes to what Jesus wants. What often keeps us from being free? Perhaps one example, today phones are very useful for us and we can do so many things. They help our lives in so many ways. But sometimes, and for some people, maybe not for you, it's getting late at night and I know I should go to bed, but this web page is so enthralling. And I know it's time to go to bed, and if I don't go to bed now, it will affect my prayer tomorrow, and it will affect my work tomorrow. I can't stop watching this on Netflix, or I can't put this phone down. This is an example of a place where a person can grow in freedom. Or perhaps fear. I'm afraid that if I go to Beijing, Jesus, I think you want me to go to Beijing, but what if I fail? What will the people say about me? So, because of this fear, I don't dare start something new. If I find there is something that's limiting my freedom, Ignatius invites me to bring that to Jesus. What if the rich young man, he didn't walk away? What if he said to Jesus, Jesus, can you help me? I'm afraid that if I get rid of my riches, I won't have any security. Will Jesus turn his back on him and walk away? So if I find in my life there is something limiting my freedom, bring that to Jesus. This is what leads to great freedom. It's what leads to heaven. It may be actually even more important than the decision you're making if you dare to look at what limits your freedom. But let's say that for now, there's nothing huge limiting my freedom. I have a fairly good Ignatian difference. What's the next step? That is what we've been talking about in the first part. To notice on A, B, and C, what gives me the most consolation? So another way of looking at this is to remember what Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verse 43. No bad tree gives good fruit, and no good tree gives bad fruit, but we will know the tree according to the fruit. So when I look at A, B, and C of staying in Hong Kong, moving to Beijing, or moving to Canada, which one of these makes me feel most like I'm cooperating with the Lord? And this question takes time. If I haven't had the experience of doing the examen, of noticing desolation and consolation in my daily life, it's hard to start now. So if possible, to develop a habit of noticing what draws me closer to God and away from God. So more practically, when should I notice consolation? So one is obvious in prayer. When I'm at church, when I'm praying at home, when I ask God about moving or staying, which one gives me the greatest sense of peace? But just as important is noticing consolation and desolation in daily life. So what would it be like to take a weekend and go to Beijing and to meet the manager there, or to see the place where I'm going to live? And when I'm there, to notice what gives me peace. Am I more and more afraid when I'm there that weekend, more and more anxious? Or is there a sense of hope that something good is going to come out of this? So noticing in prayer and daily life are both important. But what if staying in Hong Kong gives me consolation and desolation? What if when I go to Beijing, I'm a bit afraid, but I also feel hope? And the same thing with Canada, So this goes to the key question in Ignatian discernment. When I look at A, B, and C, which option gives me the most consolation? Which option makes me feel the most like I'm cooperating with God, like I have the greatest peace in God, or gives me the most love to share with others? So this really takes time to notice. But it's the one Jian, one T in discernment. So what is this cat doing? It's waiting for its 最中意食嘅點心. So discernment involves waiting, and it may not be easy, but it takes time to notice which of the options A, B, or C provides the greatest consolation. So if sometimes waiting is very difficult, if you find yourself in this, it doesn't mean you've done something wrong. So for example, Psalm 130 is a psalm of someone waiting on God and expressing that tension to God. So wait. But how long should we wait? It's a good question. So Ignatius in the exercises does not give an absolute amount of time to make a decision. But there are two principles that can help us when we consider how long should I wait before I act. So one is the gravity, the importance of the situation. So if I'm trying to discern where to go on vacation, that's important, but it's different than whether I should marry this person or not, or move to another city. So the bigger the question, if possible, give yourself more time. That's a principle. And I realize sometimes we really don't have time. We have to make a decision this week. So work with what life gives you. But if possible, to give yourself time if it's an important question. But more practically, how should I know when to stop waiting and when to act? Wait for a direction to emerge. What do I mean by that? So for example, let's say I've been praying for a month about moving or staying in Hong Kong. And in general, when I think about moving to Canada, that's the one that gives me more consolation than staying or moving to Beijing. And it's not just one day. 一般来说, in general, moving to Canada makes me feel closer to God when I visit there and when I pray. That's what I mean by waiting for a direction to emerge. If one of the options seems to be giving consistently more consolation than the others, that's a sign that I can move on. However long that takes for you. So there is one more step before actually acting, and that is asking for confirmation. So how do I do this? So I noticed that a direction has emerged, let's say moving to Canada, in general gives me more consolation than the others. And I say, Lord, it's been a month, I've been asking you and praying about this, and I think you are inviting me to move to Canada. So then I make a decision in my heart. I don't necessarily tell anyone about this, but I make a decision in my heart, and I offer this to God. And then I notice tonight, tomorrow, on Tuesday, the week ahead, do I still have consolation? Do I still feel like I'm cooperating with God? Do I still feel peace in my heart? If so, we can say that that is a confirmation from God that we are indeed cooperating with God. But if after I make that decision in my heart, and tonight and the next day I'm actually getting more and more worried, more and more anxious, more and more afraid, then it means at least for now I need to wait. I need to go back and observe consolation and desolation again because the time yet has not come to act. So you can say this is again a tension of waiting between praying and action. If I do feel that confirmation, then finally to act, and to act with love and to act with courage. You may think this is very obvious, but sometimes after discerning, we take 2 steps forward but 1 step back, to hesitate. What Ignatius invites to the exercises is if we begin with love, and if we try to be open to God's voice, even though we are not 100% sure, to act with confidence and move ahead with confidence because we believe we are acting with love and we believe we are acting with Jesus. This process, I've spoken very quickly, is not foolproof. There is a chance we may have misheard God's voice. But in general, through the ages, through the centuries since Ignatius has given this to us, it has brought blessing to many people. It has helped people to dare to take this jump. I see that there's just a couple of minutes left. In general, when I give a smaller talk, perhaps I will see if there are any questions, but maybe we can have a discussion with everyone later. Maybe I'll just ask you, if you don't mind, I'll ask you a question. It's a question that people ask me. Why is God's voice so subtle? Why do we have to go through this process? Why do we have to discern? After all, God is all-powerful. If God wanted to, and God can, just send a WhatsApp about which one I should choose. And honestly, that would be good for me, and I live out God's kingdom, it's good for God. So why doesn't God just let me know more clearly? Did you ever think about that? Maybe I can give some type of response, maybe not a total answer, but some type of response with your help, if you will allow me. Have you ever been in love with someone? And I don't mean just love someone. Have you ever fallen in love with someone? If so, can you see that person's face in your mind and your heart for a second? If it's many people, that's okay, just pick one. Can you see that person's face in your mind and your heart? Do you remember when you first noticed that person? So you didn't know them yet, but you noticed them. At that time, were you okay from looking at them from afar? Or in some way did you want to get closer to them, to get to know them in some way? Let's say that you want to get to know them, okay? I don't have time to ask individually, I would like to, but perhaps maybe not today. Let's say you want to get to know them. I give you two options. The first option is to go up to them and say, oh, hi, it's about 3:30, do you want to get some coffee? Get to talk? Or maybe in Hong Kong, maybe you say, sik dim sum, gao. This is your option A. Get to know them over coffee, over dim sum. Option B is you go up to the person, you grab their shoulders and you say, you must love me and spend your life with me. It'll be good for you. Do you pick option A or B? You pick A. Because why? You know that true love involves true freedom. It's risky in a way because that person may reject you. They may say, no, I don't want to talk to you. But if you force them to love you, you will always wonder if that love is genuine or it's because they have no choice. Is it possible that our relationship with God is also like this? So that God gives us real freedom to choose between A, B, and C, but gives us freedom to such a degree that if we want, we can totally ignore God's voice. So God makes God's voice subtle, so that we don't have to listen to it. And if we don't listen to it, in a way, God's heart breaks. This is the spirituality of the Sacred Heart. But if God's voice is subtle, and we choose to pursue, to know, to understand God's voice, as subtle as it is, for God, this is beautiful. Because we have chosen something totally free. We have chosen God. But it's a tension. This is the tension of discernment. And Ignatius here is not offering an answer. He's offering something to try. So perhaps I will end in that way, in this tension, that this context of love, but the freedom that God gives us. And perhaps end with a short prayer. This is a prayer not by a Jesuit, but by a Trappist, Thomas Merton. Perhaps you've heard of it. It is The Road Ahead. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think that I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have this desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen. Thank you for your attentiveness. May God bless you and your lives.